Greetings, everyone. Thank you for finding the time to join us today from all corners of the world. I just got a note that we have even attendees from South Korea. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Caucasus edition, which is the journal that is hosting today's event. And we have two co-moderators. I am Philip Gamagelian, one of your co-moderators, also an editor at Caucasus edition, and an assistant professor at the Kroc School of Peace Studies at the University of San Diego. I'm joined today by my good friend and colleague, Sevil Husseinova, also an editor at Caucasus edition, and who is also a researcher at the Center for Independent Social Research in Berlin. We also have two distinguished speakers today, who I'm sure have no need for introduction for anyone who knows our region. Having said that, protocol is protocol, so it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Žirayr Liparityani, a professor emeritus of history at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, as well as Mr. Zaur Shiriev, who is an analyst, a South Caucasus analyst at the International Crisis Group. The topic of today's seminar are the failures and the prospects of the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process. And we hope it will be only the first in a series of monthly webinars that we organize on the topic of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The second webinar is already planned for February 16, which is also Tuesday around the same time. And we will post a link to it at some point in the chat window. Turning to the format of the conversation, we are hoping to have this as an interactive discussion between the co-hosts and the speakers. And the first half of about 90-minute webinar will be devoted to a discussion on the two main topics of today, which are the failures and the prospects of the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process, as well as the third topic, which is the current developments and the risks that they contain. The second half of the seminar is devoted to a Q&A session where we hope to involve our audience. And you can find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, so feel free to post there any questions you might have. If you cannot find the Q&A button, you also can post your comments or questions in the chat window, and it's visible only to the moderators and to the panelists. It's not visible to the other audience members. You can choose to post your questions in your own name or anonymously. Having said that, I need to acknowledge that we have over 700 RSVPs and over 500 people already watching, which means that we likely will not be able to get through every single question. So what we will be trying to do is to group the questions into topics for discussion. And in the second half of the conversation, we will try to address 3 or 4 topics that you raise in your questions. And if we still don't get to your question, we promise that we will read through them and try to compile new set of topics for the discussions down the road in March, April, and the further seminars. So without further ado, I'll pass the word here to Sevil Husseinova to start us off. Sevil. We cannot hear you. We can hear you out there, but we cannot hear what you're saying. Can you get the volume up or get closer?
Is it better?
It's good now.
Yeah, good now. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Phil, for the introduction. Dear colleagues, guests, thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday evening or morning, depending on the time zone. As Phil already mentioned, we start a new series of webinars in the completely new context. It's obvious that the last war and its results have brought about new realities to the region. There are many new questions and challenges, and we are not going to describe the events of the last months, but in order to move forward, we must, in any case, understand the reasons behind the failure of the long-lasting negotiation process. There have been different stages, moments, situations during this process. At some points, the negotiators themselves have been changed. I would like to start with a question to Professor Liparityan. As a long-time observer and a negotiator himself, why did negotiations fail? This is, of course, a very broad question, and we have to narrow the topic down. Just yesterday, we could observe how the sides see the specifics of the negotiation process differently. During the trilateral meeting in Moscow, neither President Aliyev nor Putin mentioned the OSCE Minsk group, while Prime Minister Pashinyan stressed that he considered the format of the Minsk group to be important. This institution of co-chairs was criticized before, during, and after the war. Particularly in Azerbaijan, in the post-war months, the Minsk group had been heavily criticized for its inefficiency and inability to deal with the conflict. In your opinion, how effective was the activity of the Minsk group in negotiation process for the last years, and whether they had any resources and possibilities to really influence the conflict parties to achieve a compromise? Professor Liparityan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Sainova. First, thank you for organizing this event. There's too many changes occurring too fast, and it's important to catch up, although sometimes we're not in a position to really understand what is the meaning of what we know is happening. And certainly difficulties seeing the future. There are many reasons for the failure of negotiations. I'll mention a few first and then answer the specific question asked by Mrs. Sainova. This has not been a conflict of just interests, which are easier to resolve. This has been a conflict in which the sides have invested their history, their culture, their identity. A conflict that is too much part of domestic developments on both sides. Specifically, one can remember that in both sides, staying in power meant taking maximalist, extremely nationalist positions, using that kind of discourse, and then people accepting that kind of discourse and then having difficulty accepting compromises. There was not much trust between the parties. Very importantly, the parties did not formulate minimum positions as opposed to their maximum positions. The minimum not being fixed, that meant that they were not sure what to accept. The two sides are resolving different problems. For Azerbaijan, it's a matter of territory, and people are not that important on it. For Armenia, it is people on their historic territory. It is possible to argue that for both sides, war was what they took their chances with for different reasons and with different logics. So while negotiating, they always had in mind that, maybe this will be resolved by another war. And in fact, that's what happened. Now, as to the specific question on the Minsk group, I think that the Minsk group, in fact, was ineffective. Not that they did not have resources. These were very important countries, Russia, US, France, and indirectly France, doing work on behalf of Europe, although not formally. These are countries with huge resources, military, diplomatic, economic, and 3 members of the UN Security Council. The problem was not that they did not have resources. The problem was that although all 3 agreed on the fundamentals of the solution, which is rare, all 3 said that Karabakh could not be independent. All three said that the occupied territories would have to be returned. Despite this, they did not look at the Karabakh conflict just as a conflict of that particular definition. They looked at it as part of the issue of the region, where different parties, different mediators have different interests, and at some point conflicting interests. As a result of which, I think the three countries did not use their resources. That is, they did not do a Dayton. They did not bring the sides together and compel them to accept a solution, because each side thought that whoever put pressure on one side, the other side would win. So this was the reason I think it became really very ineffective. And I've said before, for many years, that what would have been different if instead of France, US, and Russia, we had Zimbabwe, Sierra Leone, and Canada doing it. Or if the proposals that came from a think tank in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in France, or in South America. That is, if you do not use your resources, that means you are no different from others. And that missed the opportunity. So I think one way that could have been resolved, and at some point in my work, I thought we might have gotten to the point where we resolved about 80% of the issues, 85%, and then the three presidents of the three countries, France, US, and Russia, could bring the leaders together and kind of put them in the room and say, you agree or else. And that we never got to that. No one wanted to do that. So in my view, this is basically the reason, the various reasons, but as far as the international mediation is concerned, it is very clear that although formally even Russia says that yes, the OSCE Minsk group is somehow involved, my understanding from their involvement as far as Russia is concerned is that France and the US will work to provide assistance to Russia, humanitarian assistance, rebuilding assistance, in order for Russia to do what it wants to do, but not to be involved. In the first November 9 agreement, you will remember that they said there was no time, it was a matter of hours. But this one has been planned, so why weren't the French and the Americans present? It's basically that France is out, and I'll explain later why, and the US has really given up on the world. And not just because of Trump, but because in general, the US is withdrawing. So Russia has found the right moment, and it's going to drive the process, however much the others may complain. So I don't see much of a role for the other two coming in, although Russia will want to keep it formally under OSCE, and then whatever agreement is reached, get the OSCE to approve it.
Thank you, Professor, for the insight.
Seville, we cannot hear you again.
And now, is it okay now? Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for the insight. Let's us imagine that there were no mediators. And I turn it over to Mr. Shiriev. You were involved with observing the conflict and the peace process. What you would add to the question, or let's us imagine that there were no mediators in the negotiation process, would Armenia and Azerbaijan have had any chance of reaching a compromise and deal directly without any support of the mediators? And if so, why did this not happen?
Thank you for inviting me to this the debate. I think this is a very retrospective question. I think we have a different interpretation if we say that whether imagine that there were any mediators. I think I will look differently to this question. So the one example is that when the new Armenian government came to power, I think they start a direct communication between them. So they open up communication channel, so they have a chance of rebuilding the trust and also to move forward the negotiations. So but this the direct negotiation after so many years didn't bring any result, any positive result between the sides. But I think that Dr. Liparityan is here. I think he was one of the person who acted as a direct negotiation with Azerbaijan counterparts in 19th, and it was very successful in some issues. So especially the regulation of the ceasefire and other related issues. So I think the direct channel would be very good for sides to move forward. But without mediators, I think it will be very not possible to have a very negotiated settlements on the conflict. So, but coming to the question about the Minsk group, I think, so we have a different expectation from Minsk group, both Azerbaijan and Armenia. I mean, why there is a direct criticism to the Minsk group, because Minsk group, at least from Azerbaijan perception, is that acted as a messenger, not as a mediators. So I think the messenger means that they delivered the message of Baku to Yerevan and also delivered Yerevan's message on particular issues to Baku. So it was done. But they didn't bring any new ideas to the negotiation table. So the last time they did this, and when they drafted the Madrid principles in 2007 and 2009. So first of all, I think the expectation from Minsk group was different. So, but they acted differently. And the second issue is that there was a perception, and it's not only the perception is very we see on the Minsk group co-chair. So in general, that everyone see that the war will be mutually destructive and more tragic than the war in 19th, and so that's why this is a deterrent against any war for both sides. So they became sure that either there will not be a war between the sides because that is the deterrence factor. The second is that the maximum the war could have happened in the similar scale of the April escalation. So no more than 4 days or the 5 days, and no outside the powers, especially Russia, will not give a chance of continuation of the war. So the factors actually also created a perception that so they can continue this negotiation over the more years. But also there's a misperception about the Minsk group co-chairs. Sometimes we saw the Minsk group co-chairs as an arbiter, not as mediators. So they will decide on behalf of Azerbaijan and Armenia. This is a wrong perception. I think this is not you cannot find a single similar case in the conflict resolution process that the mediator is deciding anything on behalf of the conflict parties. But also I would like to add one more thing that Dr. Liparityan said. I appreciate his approach in many issues, but I think for Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, or let's say all territories that controlled by Armenian troops is not merely a territorial issue. It was also human issue, humanitarian issue, and also human factor played a great role because of this. The IDPs, the forced to flee in 19th, and they were at least 10% of Azerbaijan overall population in 2000. So that's why their role in society, their demand also played an important role. So this is one of the misperception, at least I see in the Western countries, that they looked at there's no demand about the return of the IDPs, so it was forgotten after 25 years. There's no chance they will. They have already settled. So this was the misperception. I will add more, but this is, I think, not the topic of our discussion here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sharif. So one can say that both sides were mutually exclusive with very different interpretations of the possible conditions for compromise and peace. And each side believed that the mediators should support only one side and force the other to come to an agreement. Coming back to the yesterday meeting, the position of the official Azerbaijan is as follows. The war is over, and so the conflict came to an end. And I turn it to Phil. Over to you. What do you think about this, and how this position is perceived in Armenia?
Thank you, Sevil. Thank you for very insightful answers. To the first question, actually coming to the question of the failures themselves, if I also can add a couple of words, it's a big topic, of course, and deserves a webinar on its own, perhaps. But if I were to really single out one reason, I would say that since 1994 ceasefire, the governments negotiated officially over Nagorno-Karabakh, but at the same time, instead of preparing themselves, their states and their populations for peace, they did everything to prepare the populations for the second war. These have been the very heavily armed states. They have been on per capita basis two of the most militarized states in the world. And the image of each other as mutual enemies that have to be defeated rather than compromised with was continually built upon. And my worry is that even after the second war that just ended 2 months ago, we might go back to the same cycle and continue the same rhetoric, continue to escalating and preparing for a third and possibly much more destructive war, considering that the conflict is now regionalized. And whoever comes out as a beneficiary of that possible future third war, it will likely be neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan, but third parties. And that is very much concerning to me. And that does bring us to the second question, second topic for discussion today. And since we started with Professor Liparityan in the first round, I'll start with Mr. Shiriev in this one and turn to Azerbaijan. As Sevil mentioned, we can hear two rather contradictory messages coming from Baku. On the one hand, on a very high level, you can hear that the war is over and the conflict is resolved. Just yesterday, President Aliyev brought this up exactly in similar wording during the press conference that followed his meeting with President Putin and Prime Minister Pashinyan. On the other hand, you can hear a rather hostile rhetoric coming again from the government and from government-controlled media, including territorial claims to Republic of Armenia itself, particularly Zangezur, and even more basic humanitarian issues are not resolved, such as the return of prisoners of war. And if the conflict is resolved, then why is any side holding to prisoners of war and not returning them? These are just 2-3 particular issues I brought up, but I want to turn to you and see what's your opinion, what's your thinking about the current developments and what risks do we have now? So.
Thank you, Phil. I think for the first one, yes, I think there is a rhetoric is that war is over. So right now that we should give a chance to peace. At the same time, I say yes, we saw some irritant approach, but this is the problem is that these people are in the social media, but social media is not the actual society. So sometimes we are misinterpreting that they are actually reflecting their societal views on different issues. But if you respect the international law and law in general, I think there shouldn't be any claim or historical claim or any other claim to Armenian sovereign territories. So I think this is a just position, I guess, the Azerbaijani government. But at the same time, yes, we heard sometimes that about this the historical lands. So based on the context, we can misinterpret these things differently. My approach is that yes, the approach right now, the approach is that the war is over. So we should accept that war is over. It also means that there will not be any new war. So, and there shouldn't be groups of people that think that there will be a rematch of this war, the Third Karabakh War or the Fourth Karabakh War. So we should look up to the more economic opportunities. These things about this the Armenian sovereign territories also. This concern is coming also about this how demarcation is happening right now in international border areas, and there are some uncertainties, some concerns of the local population, and I think it's based on the Soviet Socialist Republic that the borders might be is happening very quickly, not transparent. It might also it has affected the some populations the life, so that's why it creates a much more concern, much more, let's say, disappointment by locals. But otherwise, I think yes, the war is over. But also there is another rhetoric that there will not be any status. But everyone understood that if for final negotiation solution, so at least there will be some clarity about this the status of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So, but right now the official position is that no status, and we will continue this issue, this negotiation. But one thing is should be clear to everyone is that Azerbaijan and Armenia often say that people claim that they don't recognize each other, but I think they recognize each other's territorial integrity back to 1991, 21st of December in Alma-Ata Declaration. So both Azerbaijan and Armenia based on their Soviet territories. So.
So I'll later ask Professor Liparian to comment on that question that you just raised, but going back to what you were saying quickly. So if I understood you right, you're saying that this is simply a starting negotiating position, saying that there is no status, but in principle you think it is still up to negotiation. So
I think yes, before Azerbaijan position was most Azerbaijan presented its maximalist position on status, offering that they will be high level status to Nagorno-Karabakh. But right now I think the approach has changed. So right now approach is that we are going to offer the minimalist approach. Minimalist approach is that the cultural autonomy, which everyone understood that it's not going to be acceptable. So, and we will start our negotiation position on this, the minimal approach, minimalist approach.
Thank you. And do you see any other risks in the current developments that can contribute to this further escalation?
I think yes, there are many risks. The first risk is that there is a different interpretation of this, the 9th of November ceasefire agreement, especially when it comes to the fourth and the first provision of agreement, which I think this Azerbaijan refers to fourth article of this agreement as peacekeeping force of Russian Federation shall be deployed in parallel with the withdrawal of Armenian troops. So Azerbaijan sees is that all Armenian troops or de facto authorities, they should leave the region, and only authority should be under the control of the Russian troops. But the Russian approach or the Armenian approach is that it should be interpreted based on the first article of this agreement, which says that everyone stays on the actual position when this agreement is coming into force. So this is one issue. The second issue is that the question is that whether there will be a new the lines, let's say line, there will be contact lines of contact between Azerbaijanis and Armenians in the Karabakh region, or there will be a chance of reintegration or more cooperation in this area which is under the Russian the control zone. And based on that, I think there will be many small questions about electricity, the impact of humanitarian issues, the life of the local population, so the mining. So there are many the small but very important issues that affect the local population life on both sides.
Thank you, Zaur. Professor Liparian, let's turn to Armenia. In the last 2 months, we've seen a great deal of internal instability in Armenia. And on the one hand, we have a pretty well organized opposition led by the two previous administrations of Kochayan and Sarkisyan, and parties aligned with them, such as Dashnaftetun currently, who are demanding, on the one hand, the resignation of the Pashinyan government, and also seem to be standing on more revanchist positions vis-a-vis Karabakh or relations with Azerbaijan, at least in the longer term. And on the other hand, we have the current government that seem to have lost a great deal of its initial legitimacy, both domestically and internationally. And yet, in practice, is refusing to resign or call new elections, while at the same time doesn't seem to be able to negotiate on some even key or simple or basic issues, rather, such as return of prisoners of war. Even yesterday, we saw that there was a summit and that question was not resolved, but also keep control over roads connecting the capital of Armenia, Yerevan, with the south, and by extension, in the longer term, potentially jeopardizing the viability of Armenia as a state. And these are just a few issues that look like setting us up for further instability and escalation. The question to you would be, do you see this as challenges, or what other risks do you see in current developments?
Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Zaur. I would like to specify that I should have done earlier when I said Azerbaijan is not concerned about people. I meant for the territory of Karabakh and basically for Armenians, and that's the issue. The issue is Armenians in Karabakh and their relationship to Azerbaijan or Armenia. So I think to that, in that sense, my comment would be largely correct. I would also add that it's not just social media that is making claims on Armenia. It is at the highest level of the Azerbaijani government. In terms of the direct negotiations that Zaur mentioned and Ms. Husseinova, I think we have a basic problem. That is, if the parties do not consider the problem to be theirs and they wait for others to find solutions, then this is likely the outcome. That is, the others also say, this is your problem, you have to resolve it. So we have not seen any aggressive proposals from the parties since '97 to solve their own problem. And that is one of the issues. As far as the next war is concerned, I think it will not be a war for Karabakh or for Armenians there. It will be a war for the region, even if Karabakh is the excuse to do it. So it is beyond this conflict. Now, as far as the Armenia situation in Armenia is concerned, I would say that there's obviously a disappointment with the Prime Minister and his party, and anger, of course, but I do not believe that people see this opposition as the solution to the problem. They are very circumspect, and they do not see how this group of opposition leaders who have been in power in the past and who have lost the elections can come back and solve any problem. So Armenia is in a very serious crisis of leadership, not so much one of constitution, although the opposition wants to bypass the constitution, and even the president is talking about a coalition government, and a coalition government would be much worse than anything we've had, because what we need now is some wisdom and circumspection, and not just unity for the sake of unity. So let me go back for a second to the November 9 agreement, or yesterday's statement. First of all, these two have to be taken together. We have to understand one as the continuation of the other, a sub-element of the first November 9 document. The first thing we know, was mentioned already that by Ms. Husseinova, that the OSCE wasn't there, number one. Number two, it was not the military that were invited, as it was the case in July, to sign an agreement. It was the political leadership that signed the ceasefire agreement, and it was the political leadership that was invited to Moscow. But we have to realize that the November 9 statement is much more than a ceasefire agreement. It is less than a settlement, but it does settle two of the most important issues that were a problem and for the resolution of the conflict. One is that the occupied territories have been taken back. They are returned. There's no more question as to whether they are negotiating chip or whatever. It's over. So that's a very, very important element, because this is one element that distinguished Karabakh conflict from, let's say, Abkhazia or South Ossetia or Transnistria. That is in those cases, or Chechnya, the secessionist group, people, state, or unit did not go beyond their own borders that was defined during the Soviet Union, except in this case. So that major issue was resolved in favor of Azerbaijan, yes, but still it was resolved. And the other is, the statement implies the recognition by Armenia that everything that is internationally recognized as Azerbaijan is Azerbaijan. That's why President Aliyev can do his interpretation. So these two are very important. In terms of the future status, we have to realize that that issue too has been narrowed down in terms of options. It is very clear, although it was clear that independence was almost impossible before, that that is no longer on the table, independence for Karabakh. And as many of you indicated, the question is now whether the Armenians in Karabakh will be recognized as an ethno-religious community that has the rights for culture, church, school, and maybe other things, or will there be an administrative, political, territorially defined Armenian Karabakh? This is, I think, where the negotiations may go. And I think this is a very important element. The November 9 agreement is a very, very flexible agreement. There are too many areas that are left undefined or not clearly defined. And sometimes that's constructive vagueness in international documents, because if you try to specify too much, then the other adage comes into play, that is, the devil is in the details. So you kind of fudge the details, get to the basic, and you get what you can from a document. And now with the meeting yesterday, we see that one of the issues that was critical for Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Russia, that is the thing that was clarified most at first. For Armenia, it would have been the POWs, but that wasn't resolved. For Armenia, it might have been further clarification of whatever status may be left. That wasn't resolved. What was resolved, partially anyway, was the transportation routes, the connections. And we see that that was a key to the resolution of the conflict, the process. And I think we need to be aware that the process has started. The peace process, whatever is left, has started. And this is the formula that will take place. The other issues will come gradually into play. And the formula is Russia brings the two together, kind of tells them what is feasible, and then somehow it will find a solution and it will impose. The problem is that I do not think Armenia has the same leverage as it had before the war. It is very obvious. So the process will be somewhat facilitated by that. The peace that will come is not to the liking of Armenians. It is not a fair peace. It may not be a just peace, but peace is not always a fair settlement. And this is what we're facing. My last point would be the following. Will Azerbaijan continue the rhetoric that is basically racist? Armenians are dogs, we will chase them like dogs. Will the Azerbaijani rhetoric and position continue to be one of domination rather than governance, which has been a problem? Azerbaijani rhetoric has given no reason for Armenians to trust that if they are part of Azerbaijan, they will not be dominated rather than governed. So this is the question that is there for Azerbaijan. Will it be a country that vanquished another people and it can do whatever it wants and humiliate, which is possible, it can do. That's what is happening so far. And that can also bring peace. Soviets brought peace for 7 years. The question is that on the one hand, I see two kinds of rhetoric in Azerbaijan. On the one hand is the international talk about economic development for the region. Now everything is resolved and we go and develop, and Azerbaijan will be the economic driver of the region's development, and all Armenians have to do is accept some money, accept the terms, and enjoy a new economic development. This is one. And the other is that we will dominate you. We will not give you any chance to be anything other than what we decide you to be. And we can put claims on Armenia. These are the two realities with which we have to live, and Azerbaijan has to make a decision. The Armenian side is not in a position to make many decisions. The Azerbaijani side is. If it wants a peace that is good for peoples, then it will have to change its rhetoric. It will have to change the way it talks and it behaves. And without that, yes, you can bring peace, you can dominate, you can win another war, or you may not need another war. The Turkey is there, Turkish troops are coming. So that's not the question in my mind anyway. The question is whether Azerbaijan will behave in a way that eventually will be acceptable to Armenians, and then you have real peace, or it will behave in a way that leaves the Armenian side subdued, suppressed, but still unhappy. Now, that may or may not lead to another war, but that's not genuine peace in my mind.
Thank you, Professor Liparitian. Yeah, pretty concerning, frankly, and I do hope we can see a change of rhetoric rather soon. Sevil, if I can turn to you, any comments on the risks do you see in the current situation, or perhaps any opportunities?
Yeah, can you hear me? No? Yeah, thank you for your insights, and thank you, Professor Liparitian, for your comments. Yes, now what we're observing now, it's a kind of peaceful enforcement, peace enforcement. Yeah, so this is a moment when we want to live in peace, but it comes from not from the peaceful meanings, but with the means of enforcement. And there are lots of course, there are lots of other risks which we didn't touch upon. But the biggest risk, what I observed, that we are once again in a situation of mutual misunderstanding, of speaking different languages about the same situation. And let's talk about the prospects, about the opportunities, what can be done to restart an effective peace process. And I asked Mr. Sharif, what do you think, what can or should Azerbaijan do to restart an effective peace process?
Thank you, Sevil. I think first of all, I think we should have the national dialogue. I mean, what lacks right now as you mentioned, as you say, that this is a misunderstanding between Azerbaijanis and Armenians, but this is not only the lack of understanding. Also, this is I think that there's no genuine talks between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. But before all talks or all communication between Azerbaijanis and Armenians based on this a very small groups of people, based on expert level or based on the civil society groups, but there weren't any national dialogue or the discussion between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. Even the 90s, after the war, there was some better communication between the media, between the population in a large, which they heard, they communicated, they understand the other side, the position. So this also creates an empathy between the sides to understand other sides' position, other sides' feelings, other sides the disappointment or the wish. So there should be, first of all, the national dialogue between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. Might be it seems very earlier to talk about it, but eventually I think this should be a part of this the dialogue, the broader dialogue between Azerbaijanis and Armenians first. The second issue is much more important, is that you know that a denied or the silence past is likely to lead to similar conflict, especially where the former victims or survivors feel unheard and uncompensated. So when the war ends with negotiated solution, always there will be a mechanism to address the past human rights abuse and violation of international humanitarian law. But especially since the first war, there weren't any commission, let's say the platform to discuss and to tackle this issue, the human rights violation and the war crimes and other things. Not only about this the recent war, but also the first war, first Nagorno-Karabakh war. So first, so there should be. As they created this transport commission, there should be also some commission of the peace commission or the commission that to look to this the issue. The third issue is about the transport corridors. I agree that the right now Azerbaijan approach is that transport corridors will bring the much more opportunities for both Azerbaijan and Armenia, and this is an idea, regionalization of these countries. So regionalization will bring much more prospect and economic prosperity to the population, but this is a long-term project. So we will not feel immediately. Unlike the 1990s, when the first war ended, there were some, let's say, the communication or coexistence of Azerbaijan and Armenians living together. So that's why that time this sound better to population that having much more economic prosperity, regional integration. But right now, after 30 years of disintegration of Azerbaijan and Armenia, it sounds less attractive and less possible. But eventually, I will say that yes, these transport corridors, opening borders, economic prospect could bring the much more the possibility of re-engagement of Azerbaijan and Armenians. Another issue might be is the humanitarian approach. So they should be much more broader focus. As Professor Libardian mentioned about this lack of, or the 19 November agreement. So there are some article about this involvement of the UN relevant agencies for humanitarian work. We don't see yet about this issue. This only we see Russian monopolization of the humanitarian affairs. So there is need urgently a much more international focus, international engagement to this humanitarian affairs. So actually, if you talk about this peace process, how it's going to look like, so we can talk about the short-term expectation, long-term expectation. But I do agree that yes, rhetoric should change in both the countries. So rhetoric shouldn't be about revanchism or about this one side win and other side loss. So this this Versailles like perception or the attitude is not going to help.
Thank you, Zaur. Think about short-term steps. I would add that there are lots of problems, challenges, which we should address urgently. They are humanitarian problems, the war prisoners, the resettlement of IDP. So there are lots of short-term problems which should be addressed right now. Professor, my question to you, the same question about the prospects and about what Armenia can do or should do to restart the peace process.
Thank you. The first thing is not to have a government that does not understand what the November 9 document means. That returns to the mentality that was there before, that was based on a total lack of appreciation of power relations. That is what you can do and what you cannot do. Not only in terms of what resources you have, let's say in the military field, in and by itself, but compared to what your antagonist has. So we need to think our mentality to begin with, and make sure that we don't bring a government that starts thinking of another war. Whatever must be done through negotiations, I think. I agree with Zaur on the need for a broader dialogue. And I think that dialogue can become possible if the rhetoric is changed in Azerbaijan. We should remember that it was the Azerbaijani government that put an end to journalists' visits and various groups that were working together on the social level. Now, the question of the transport corridors, economic development is also a point on which I agree with you and Zaur and others. But the question is, when does that become real? And which comes first? Is it the change in rhetoric and the adoption of a new rhetoric that brings cooperation, or is it the rhetoric of imposition? As far as the international involvement of in humanitarian affairs, yes, certainly. The UN should be involved, and that is a question now that will be that must be worked out between Russia and the UN agencies, as well as Azerbaijan and UN agencies. So the possibilities of development are there, but we must begin by deciding whether we want to be neighbors or conqueror and subdued nation. This is where we are. And it will require quite a bit of wisdom and circumspection and ingenuity on the part of the Armenian side to work with Azerbaijan. And I do favor always favored the direct discussions. The international community should be there to support, but I do not think that with the intention of solving problems, there could be better solutions than those that the two parties most directly involved can find. So whatever process is taking place should continue at another level as well, directly between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Not to contradict the Russian process, but to complement it. That is the recognition that this is our problem. This is the problem of Azerbaijan. This is the problem of Armenia and Armenians. So if we expect to live together in the future, we must start talking together now. Otherwise, the future will not come. So in general, I agree with the comments.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Maybe this is the right time to start talking to each other. And Phil, maybe you have something to add.
Thank you. I think just for the interest of time, though, I'll want to turn to the Q&A session because a lot of very interesting comments are coming in. So, and they are very much in line with what we are hearing. But yes, a quick comment to about what we about the question of future cooperation. Certainly, I agree with Professor Liparitian that there have been many roadblocks put to direct communication from Azerbaijan. But in my experience, there have been also many roadblocks put to cooperation from the Armenian end as well, including on the question of exchange in the last couple of years. At least our organization made many attempts and was continually blocked from the Armenian side of organizing any kind of not directly government control exchanges between journalists or experts and so on. So yes, by all means, I understand and agree that the ball is in the end of Azerbaijani half and they have to start extending a hand and engaging in direct communication and more constructive communication with Armenia and Armenians. But I also hope that we'll see a change also on the Armenian side, and there will also be more openness towards communication, direct communication and dialogue with the Azerbaijani side. And this brings us to the question that came in a few different forms from the audience about kind of this double-edged question. It's about the incentives for the sides to engage in this dialogue. And the kind of second part of the question is, if there is, what can this new peace document look like? Yeah, so that, because that can potentially be an incentive. So we have the November 9 statement, which, as you both mentioned, resolves some of the big issues. Fair and fair, it's a different conversation, but it clearly moved the conflict into a very new place. So if they are to negotiate what can be in this new, some other principles are out the window now, essentially. They are not relevant anymore. What is it that's new? Content for negotiations. But second part of the question is, what are the incentives, either for the governments or for the societies to engage with each other at this stage? And perhaps, Professor Liparitian, you can comment on Armenia. Let's say Azerbaijan makes its step. What are the incentives for Armenians who perceive largely this current situation as unjust? What are their incentives to engage? And then I'll follow up with a similar question to Zaur. Žirayr? You are muted.
When I think about these issues, I always think in terms of all the parties concerned, in terms of what is feasible and what works for the future. And it's relatively simple. The answer of the incentive, there's a big answer and there's a small answer. The big answer is that if you have leadership in these countries that wants a future that is dignified for their peoples, a future that is peaceful for their peoples, and that makes it possible for individuals and groups to live in peace and in some kind of hope for some kind of economic security other than military, etc., then that's the incentive for peace. That's the incentive to sit and resolve the issues. That is, the governments of these countries must decide what issues are they resolving when they are deciding on conflict resolution. Are they resolving partisan issues? Are they resolving their sense of pride? Are they resolving their sense of a big past glorious history that must return? Or are they thinking about today? This is the big question. If you ask the right question, the right answer there is not difficult. And the second thing is that the more you come close to a peace agreement, to a process of resolving your problems, the more assistance you will get from the international community, and the more you are in charge of your own sovereignty and future. I think these are not easy, but these are important and critical incentives.
Thank you. And indeed, I've been also thinking that the very sovereignty, perhaps initially of Armenia, but these are dominoes that fall one after another. As we've seen from history, the sovereignty of one part of Caucasus is gone. That probably will trigger the chain reaction also in Georgia and Azerbaijan. So I do hope that we can start looking at it from the bigger perspective. But the second part of the question was, and perhaps you touched a bit upon it in the previous comment, but if you have anything to add, what is it that if they, let's say, agree to and decide to sit and negotiate in a good faith, what is it that this new negotiation document can be about?
I don't think I have much to add. I think
right.
It's still, there are some open areas where elements could still be negotiated, but I don't think it's the right time at this point to say this is what it should look like.
Fair enough. Thank you. And Zaur, if I can turn to you, what you're thinking about either existing incentives in Azerbaijan or what there could be moving forward to engage in a good faith in a constructive process.
I think it's too early. I mean, to put forward any ideas that what will be the main principles of negotiation, the future negotiation, and when there will be such negotiation between the parties. But I think based on the concern of Azerbaijan, I think their main motivation right now to rebuilding of the territories and the mining and other issues and return of the IDPs. So it's a longer term process for Baku also, and it needs a much more investment, much more energy is going to this the particular issue. I think so. That's why, based on the priorities, I think the first priority is to rebuilding of the cities and basic infrastructure and employment, and then returning the IDPs to their homes. So this is the main energy of the government, and the government is going to this direction. But at the same time, there is some issues that let's say the small issues might be, for example, roads connectivity. So there is no proper roads that connect Azerbaijan from, let's say, between Kalbajan and Azerbaijan proper, which they should use this the territory is under the Russian control. So the same is true about this Laçın, from Laçın to Kalbajar and all from Shusha to Azerbaijan proper. So there are the small issues. But this is how they're going to resolve. So then about this electricity, water supply, and other things, that is the concern of the local population. So this kind of the small things that they should start first of all to, I mean, in order to move forward and to satisfy their local population. But the second issue, much more important for right now Azerbaijan, is that to negotiate of this mandate of the Russian peacekeepers and how it's going to look like. We have Azerbaijan and Armenia gave the mandate to Russia to conduct the peacekeeping forces, but the provision and act of duty and other things are unclear. Especially, this is a great concern of Baku. So that's why this is also the main priority for Baku, but they're going to negotiate this with Russia. So a lot of things, I think right now, at least in the short term, Azerbaijan is going to negotiate with Russia rather than Armenia, especially when it comes to the peacekeeping forces and the control of the so-called Laçın corridor and other things. But also the time will come, they should negotiate something that mutually interesting of the local Armenian population and Azerbaijanis in Nagorno-Karabakh region, which then they will need counterparts that have a much more open to dialogue and ready to communication. So when it comes, when it's going to come, and what will happen then, it's unclear to me for now. But this is a very short-term concern. So it should happen very immediately in the next couple of months. But in the longer term, as a peace process, it's hard to say right now that what they're going to negotiate.
Thank you. Sevil, do you have questions from the audience that you would like to bring up?
Yes, we have lots of questions. I'll try to specific questions as well. I have a question to both Liparityan and Shiriev. After Second Karabakh War, do you see any opportunities for the negotiations on the level of civil societies of Armenia and Azerbaijan in favor of the straightening of peace process? Do you think that leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan should again focus on preparing population for peace? Do you think that preparing population for peace is one of important steps leading up to permanent peace and stability in the region? Professor?
Well, I think we have answered, at least I have answered. Of course, the government should prepare their people for peace. As I said, two of the main issues seem to be resolved, and all of the issues that Zaur mentioned are, of course, relevant, still to be resolved. Some of these are issues to be resolved within Azerbaijan and others within Armenia. But it is essential that governments agree to things that do not, that respect the dignity of peoples. This is very important, that whatever is done in the process, permanent peace will depend on whether it is an honorable peace or not, whether it takes into consideration the fundamental interests of the two countries and the peoples involved. This is, for me, the key to future peace. Otherwise, it will be an imposed peace, and it will not produce even the best results economically.
You're muted, Sevil.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Shiriev, do you want to add something to this question?
Yes, the first question about the role of the civil society groups, I think we don't. So, yeah, before, at least in the two decades, we saw that civil society engagement with civil society, not with their population. So this was the main problem. Armenian civil society engaged with Azerbaijan civil society. But the main lack was that they didn't engage with their own societies. So this has some objective and subjective reasons why this not happened. But right now, is it the right time to engage with Azerbaijan and Armenian civil societies? Probably yes, but this should be the visibility should be there. So before there was a lack of the visibility for obvious reasons that this can create a disappointment, or people treat them differently. So right now might be they have a much more chance to be much more visible. So on particularly in Azerbaijan, I think there's there's need much more transparency and also more support to civil society, especially the donor organization, to get a donor from abroad for this peace process. So this was a main problem for civil societies to be active in Azerbaijan. So another question about the preparation population for peace. So before the war, it was understood that we should prepare population to the possible compromise. At least this was my understanding, is that the preparation population for peace meant before that preparation of them to some compromise. But right now, preparation population for peace should be to give them a chance or understanding that they should live side by side in the future. So there should be coexistence, and there should be some trade and discussion and dialogue between the individuals from both countries. So who should do this? I think the government is not the main. Everyone is expecting from the governments to do this. I'm not sure about this, that the government to tell the civil society to engage and prepare population for peace. Yes, for what depends from governments to rhetoric, how they are setting up their rhetoric. So this will help other actors, whether this is civil society, individuals, journalists, media, they will follow their level of rhetoric. So first of all, this is expected from government. And the other issues about this technical and other issues depend mostly to civil society, but they should be very conductive. They should be very environment for them to conduct this operation and this society tractor process.
Thank you, Zaur. And Phil?
Yeah, we have many questions connected to the role of Russia, and let me try to see how we can summarize the questions. So one cluster of questions is about something like this. So the situation has changed, and Karabakh was unique, as Professor Liparityani mentioned, in a sense that it controlled more territories than its Soviet autonomous borders. It was also unique in a different way that it was the only conflict that did not have direct Russian involvement in the post-Soviet space. So it was pretty much between the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis to be able to resolve. Of course, with the support of other actors in the first place, first of all, Russia, but they still had this direct communication agency over these territories. So that has changed, and in that sense, the conflict starts looking much more like South Ossetia than Nagorno-Karabakh of 2 months ago. So there is Russian peacekeepers. The conflict is contained to the part of the former Soviet autonomy. So how far should we take this analogy? Yeah? So if what we saw is happening in South Ossetia and as well as Crimea and Transnistria and so on, so sooner or later that seems to bring towards the conflict between then Russia, who had peacekeepers on the ground, and the state, the other kind of the mother state within which the autonomy was located. In this case, there would be Azerbaijan. So do we see then a potential for conflict between Russia and Azerbaijan down the road if the trend continues and if we start looking like South Ossetia? The flip side of the question, or the other side of the coin, is what does it mean for Armenia? Yeah, if we again build on South Ossetia or Abkhazia analogy, essentially they might be partially recognized, but they also clearly have very limited control or sovereignty over their own territory. So that certainly applies currently to Nagorno-Karabakh. Can this also transfer to Armenia? Essentially, what is the prospect of concerning role of Russia, let's say, in terms of its contribution to conflict, its own involvement in a violent conflict, but also what can be the positive role of Russia and how we can work towards maximizing the positive potential, since Russians clearly played a very positive role in terms of stopping the conflict, helping us negotiate ceasefire agreements, not once, but already twice. Or actually, we include 2016 also 3 times. So any comments from Professor Liparityani? Let's start from you.
Well, the Russian role is what Azerbaijan and Russia will decide, essentially. But let's not forget the Turkey factor, which we haven't discussed so far. It's a major element that was added, not that it was inactive before, but now it is much more of an active role, because it has become not only a partner, but also maybe a driver in Azerbaijani policy. So we have a document, the November 9, that says 5 years. And if everything goes well, then at the end of 5 years or before, 6 months before, Azerbaijan will have to decide whether it wants Russian troops there. So that's technically the legal, so to speak, part. That is the obligations that parties have toward the document of November 9. So it is possible that Azerbaijan may decide that it no longer wants to have Russian troops on its territory. And that also depends, I think, to some extent on Turkey. So Russia has achieved something with this, has sealed something rather, with this statement and with this intervention that it has wanted to do for a long time. That's to leave out the West. And in order to do that, it brought in Turkey, not only to win the war, but also to replace US presence, let's say, diplomatically and otherwise. It's not clear to me what is Russia's endgame. I don't know, maybe others do it, but I'm afraid that often it's a reflexive reaction to Russia. I know that for many years in Azerbaijan, they explained the loss of the first war because Russia did it for Armenia. These are quite simplistic explanations, also explanations that say Russia is trying to do this or that. Well, obviously, Russia wants to have more control over the general trend in the South Caucasus and less of direction toward US or NATO. So, and Turkey is not acting as NATO, Turkey is acting as Turkey. So we have a very uncertain, in my mind anyway, as to where Azerbaijan wants to go, where Turkey wants to be in 5 years. Maybe Azerbaijan will tell Russia to leave, and then that creates a brand new situation. Or Russia can find that it cannot leave, because if it does, then there will be more instability in the region, and then they will have to decide whether they go to war or not. That would be Azerbaijan plus Turkey against Russia. So in my mind, there are too many questions left.
Professor Liparityani, just to build on where you ended, though, so thank you for discussing the Russia's role, and I certainly agree with you that Russia achieved the big objective of pushing out the West from this region. But we do have quite a few members in the audience from representing the Western institutions, particularly European Union and many others. How do you see in the current situation the involvement of the Western actors, either European Union or United States or a combination of them, so how they can be the most effective in influencing the situation in a positive sense?
Well, they have a role to play in a number of areas. That is, to the extent that Azerbaijan and Armenia have some dependence on Europe, whether diplomatic, economic, or otherwise, they have a role to play, but they do not have the essential role to play. I think in terms of the conflict itself and how it proceeds, it will be largely Russia and Turkey and Azerbaijan, and to a lesser extent Armenia, and maybe also Iran. And for the future in general, these are the countries that will be important. The others can influence specific issues maybe. They can participate in the development, whether it's rebuilding. Many European companies, maybe American companies, will be signing contracts or have signed contracts. But in terms of the political issue, I don't think they will play a major role. Let me say something about the question of principles, OSCE or otherwise, of international law. in the name of which many have spoken, and the parties have often used this in order to justify their negotiation position. I do not have much trust in international principles. International law and principles are made by big governments, big countries, for big countries. And they decide where these apply and when. History is full of this. I do not think principles are that important for Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan picked one of the principles and left the others in terms of what is important. Azerbaijan said territorial integrity is important, and even by OSCE or UN principles, you have the principle of self-determination, you have the principle of peaceful resolution of conflicts, which Azerbaijan rejected from the first moment in 1991. There are many OSCE principles, that were disregarded, other than self-determination, were two: peaceful resolution of conflicts, and secondly, that all these principles must be taken together and not separately. The Armenian side took the self-determination issue and suspended the territorial integrity issue for whatever reason. So to the extent that the European Union and the US or UN represent international law, I personally do not have much trust in it. So what they can do is impact specific issues, impact reconstruction, impact some of the values that are still important and practiced in Europe, not so much in the US anymore. So, those are the areas where they could be helpful.
Thank you. A pessimistic view, and I do hope we can see a change in the US and by extension, some more respect towards the principles of international law, not for the sake of our region, but the rest of the world as well. Zaur, your take on Russia and Turkey and other international actors?
I think Russian role, so sometimes we undermine or exaggerate the Russian role, our expectation from Russia, but from the last 3-4 years, at least, it was very clear that in any kind of the peace process or any final things, that Russia will have some kind of role. Unlike we wish for much more Western engagement in 19th, less Russian role. So it was very clear that even this the Lavrov plan, there was a provision about the deployment of the Russian peacekeepers forces. So what is different right now, unlike 2016, right, there is the role of the Turkey. Turkey is a security guarantor and also the balancing actor in the region. So, and also this right now they are mutually with Russia observing this ceasefire violation things in Karabakh. So this is the one the change, that there is a counterbalancing of the Turkey. The second is that the narrative. Our understanding about Russia, when I say the our, I mean Azerbaijan, is based on this narrative, historical narrative about the Russian role in the longer term, in the 200 years, or in this the time that when the Soviet Union collapsed. But we saw many phases of the Russia. So if you look to the 1992, early 1992, you can say that Russia is a much more supporting Azerbaijan, or end of the 1992, Russia is supporting more Armenia. So there is a different interpretation of the Russian role. So there are many disappointments in Azerbaijan society. At least, I mean, there's no data that I would say that Azerbaijan society, at least based on the social media observation, that Russia involvement in the conflict and deployment of the Russian troops, and everyone is say based on the fact that Russia left the country after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this was the biggest achievement of the government. But at the same time, we always forgot that Russian troops was in Azerbaijan until 2012 at the Gabala radar station. So we always say that this is an analytical exchange center, but it was actually part of the kind of the military base of Russia in Azerbaijan. So that's why we used to live at least how to cooperate with Russia. But right now, how Russian role is much more bilateral issue between Baku and Azerbaijan. So more urgent question is that what will be the mandate will look like. So right now, probably they are going to negotiate with Baku that what Bakus is feasible, what Bakus is not feasible, and this will be part of the negotiation. So in any given time, if there will be any final solution, any, let's say, final peace, there's no doubt that Russia will have a special place in this agreement. Either Russia will be the guarantor of the peace agreement, or Russia will have some troops left to the region. So it's too early to talk about it, what Russian role will look like. But right now, I think it seems that Azerbaijan is negotiating, and Azerbaijan has the trust that they can cooperate with Russia, so without making angry the Russian authorities. So, but what about this? What others can contribute? I think that part of the question was, I mean, everyone should check the. Type in the Google that Minsk Group, and they will find that official the website which says that Minsk Group mandate. So it says that we can see Minsk Group successful if they met two objectives. One is this conducting this Minsk conference, which has not happened. Second is that multinational peacekeeping forces. So that's why when we say that the Minsk Group failed, we are saying based on this what they wrote. What they put for them as an objective. So there's a less chance that the outside powers can have a much more substantial role in the security provision of this on this issue, but there is a chance that broader Minsk Group can play a much more role. This broader Minsk Group is including OSCE Troika, other permanent members of the Minsk Group. So, but the question is that how one can use the potential of these permanent member states. This includes also Germany, I mean, Belarus, Turkey, and other countries. So, and how and when they can play a role in this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Shiriev. Thank you, Professor Liparityan. We are approaching the end of our webinar today. I very much appreciate all the insights. I want to acknowledge that we have over 60 more questions that we could not address. A lot of them were focused on geopolitics, and that is actually the topic of our next webinar that will take place in February, specifically on February 16 at the same time as this one. If I can ask my colleagues to post a link in the chat window to the next seminar, that would be appreciated. So thank you. So you can see the link in the chat window, everyone. So please consider registering to that one. You can also see the names of our 4 panelists from Russia, Turkey, as well as covering the EU angle. The question there was also about the goals of this series of webinars. Some saying that conflict is over, some saying there is nothing to talk about. So it's a really good question. And our goal here is to, we called our series The New War and Peace, meaning that we have a new situation on the ground, and it's not clear yet whether we are going towards a new war or towards a new peace, or some combination of two. Which was really what we had for nearly 30 years now, where we had some elements of peace and some elements of war. So it can be very much war and peace in the same place. And we hope with this series of webinars, first to start a dialogue among the experts who from Armenian side and Azerbaijani side, but also from the broader region, and move the conversation hopefully in a direction that can contribute to the prevalence of peace rather than war down the road. So this is our goal. Again, we hope to see more of you, or many of you, in a month as well. And I would want to also stress that we have a recording of this a webinar, and we will be posting it on our social media account, our websites, either fully or maybe a bit of a shorter version to make it easier to watch. We also are planning to provide a short written summary in English, but also in Armenian and Azerbaijani to reach a broader audience. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in a month.
Thank you.